everyone. Welcome to Speaking Python. Today the topic is variables. We are going to understand what variables are and what are their uses. We're going to talk over three main things. What are variables? Why do we need variables? And why are there different types of variables? So the first thing I want you to understand is variables are containers for data in memory. Memory, is a part of the computer where you store data. But we don't store data directly, we store data inside of containers, which we call variables. Imagine that your memory is like a cargo ship. You don't put cargo inside a cargo ship just like that. You put each piece of cargo in a container and you put the container on the ship. That's what variables are. Variables are containers for data, and all of that data is stored in containers, which all together makes up your cargo ship, which is memory. Right? Take a look at this. Assuming this is our ship, this is the computer's memory, we can store many types of variables here. We can store a variable that stores my password, a variable that stores my age, a variable that stores the cost of the burrito I ate, a variable that tells you, whether I'm obese or not. There are different types of variables, all contained within different types of containers, all inside my computer's memory. So now we talk about, what makes up a variable. Every variable must have three attributes, must have three qualities that always have to be specified. A variable must have a name because we use the name of the variable as a way to locate the variable inside the computer's memory. So if I give a variable name, let's say my age, then instead of going to a certain memory location and saying what's the value stored here, I can just say in my code, get the value of the variable my age. That's why name is important. Name is kind of like a proxy for the address. So instead of getting too technical and saying give me what data is stored in memory location 10,005, I just say give me the data stored in a variable called my age, right? So a variable has a name. Each variable also has a value, right? You have a container, you're putting something inside it. The reason why variables are called variables is that the value that a variable stores can be changed. It does not need to be constant, and that is why we call them variables. So a variable must have a name. That's how we access the variable. That's how we find out where the variable lives in memory. A variable has a value that it has stored inside it, and a variable must have a type, right? Now, some people might say that in Python you don't need to say what the type is, but a variable in Python still has a type. It's just that the Python compiler figures out the type by looking at the value, right? So what's the type? Why do we need a type? Why do variables have a type? Let's answer these questions. Take a look at this. This is a variable that is storing the state that I live in. I live in Washington. This is a piece of text. I store it in a variable named state, and the type associated with this variable is a string. A string is just a way of saying text. Take a look at another variable. This is age, not my age, of course. This is a variable called age. It is storing a different value called 23, and the Python interpreter takes a look at 23 and says, this doesn't look like text. This looks like a number. It looks like a number without decimals. So I'm just going to say this is an integer. In other programming languages, it is the job of the programmer, the person who's writing the code, to tell what type of variable it is. But in Python, the Python interpreter does it for us. Now let's go back again and make sure that we really understand why we need variables. So we write a piece of code. Code is nothing but a bunch of instructions which tell the computer what to do. Most of the time you tell the computer what to do with some data. You say go multiply something by 11, then subtract it by 27, etc. Instead of saying this, we say go and work on a variable. Pick up a variable multiply the value stored in the variable by 5, add it to 7, and store it in another variable. This allows us to have the same set of instructions work on many different inputs. For example, if I were to make a very simple program to add two numbers, I could say add 2 plus 5, just like you do in your calculator. But a program, a piece of code is better than that, because what we will do is add the value stored in two variables. That's it. That's all our code is going to be. All we then do is keep changing the values stored in those variables. So the same set of instructions can do this addition operation on all types of input. Sorry, on different values of input, not types, because the types are going to be numbers again, right? This is what makes a program different from a calculator. Take out your calculator, try to do 17 plus 15. Now try to do 23 plus 15. You'll have to enter that again. Whereas once you write a piece of code to add two numbers, you never need to change those instructions. You never need to specify those instructions again. All you need to do is to change the value stored in variables. That's why we call them variables, because we can keep changing the value stored inside them. And this is what gives code programming, computer programming, a lot more advantages on when compared to instructions that you give to the calculator, because these are also instructions, and code is also instructions. Just code works on variables, whereas calculator works on data directly. Again, I hope I'm going to show you a tiny piece of code, and I'm going to show you the outputs that are generated by using the same two lines of code. So here, if you take a look, I am asking the user, I'm declaring a variable called state, and the value that I'm going to store in it is what the user will enter. Input is the statement, as we've seen in the past, where you can ask the user to enter something from the keyboard. So you can say, please enter the state you live in. Let's say the user says, I live in Washington. I'm just going to pander to the user and say, Washington is the best state in the USA. Now, if someone comes in and says they live in California, I don't need to change these two lines of code. I don't have to say California is the best state. I just say whatever value was stored in the variable state, just output that value and say it is the best state in the USA. So if a user comes in and says Washington, I'll say go Seahawks and say Washington is the best state in the USA. Again, take a look at this variable. It has a name called state, lowercase actually. It has a type called string, and it has a value called Washington. On the other hand, if somebody else came in and said, oh, I live in California, we'll have the same thing. The program, the piece of code would not change. It would still do the same thing. It will make this user from Washington happy, make this user from California happy, or any other state happy. So I hope you get what I mean by the code works on variables and not on data directly. You change the value inside the variable to work on different inputs. Finally, we're going to talk about the last topic, which was why do variables need to have a type? Different types of variables need different amount of memory in your computer. For example, let's go back to our cargo ship. If I am transporting a SUV, right? Let's say I'm getting a European SUV coming to me from Germany. That takes a bigger container. If on the other hand, I am just getting a bike, a smart bike, a foldable bike, that needs a smaller container. So based on the type of a variable, the computer allocates different amounts of memory to it. That's what bits and bytes are for. So I would say text needs a different amount of memory. The weight of an atom, when we store that in computer, it might need different amount of memory. Your age might need different amount of memory. That's why variables have different types. Python makes it easy for us. It just says, put the variable name and give it some value and leave the identification of what the correct type is to the Python interpreter. The programmer does not need to do that. Many other languages make you do that. Python doesn't make you do that, but it's important to understand that Python variables are not without type. It's just that Python takes that responsibility of specifying the type away from the programmer, right? Python has three basic types. One's for storing numbers, storing text, and for storing yes or no, something that we call Boolean, which can only have a value of true or false. So those are the basic types in Python. What are the non-basic types or the composite types or the complex types? We will study them later. We don't need to worry about them right now. Right now, most of the code you write will work with simple variables, and you can do a lot with just simple variable types. If you are ever interested or curious about finding out what type has Python given to a certain variable, you can use a function which is called type and put your variable name inside it, and Python will give you what type it thinks this variable should have based on the values that you provided to it. Here's an example. I have declared 4 variables here. One is age, one is salary, one is state, one is valid. I have associated values with them by using the equality sign. I have said age is 23, salary is something, state is Washington, is valid is true. And now I'm using the type function. I'm saying print the type of age, salary, state is valid. Take a minute to think, what do you think the output should be? Will age be a string or will age be an integer? Is state going to be a string or is state going to be a Boolean? So this is what the program prints. Ignore the class for a bit. We'll talk about that later once we get there. For now, all I want you to do is to pay attention to the right hand side of the output. It is saying that the first print statement, age, is of type integer. Second print statement, salary, because it was stored in a variable called salary, is a type of float. That means it has a decimal value with a floating point. What's a floating point exactly? I will tell you later. State is a string. That means it stores text. And is valid is a Boolean. That means it stores just true or false. As you can see, you will take less memory to store true or false versus state. So I'm hoping that the examples are making sense, are keeping in step with the explanation. Okay, so let's review. We spoke about, what are variables? They're containers for data. Memory is your cargo ship. All the data belongs in containers. You have a container and you can change the value in the container over and over. When you write code, you don't write code directly to work on the data. You write code to work on the variables. This allows the same set of instructions to work on different types of inputs because the values in the variables are changing, but the name of the variables are not changing, so the instructions remain the same, right? In Python, you don't need to mention what the type of the variable is. The Python interpreter does that for you. And you can use the type function in case you get curious to find out, what is the variable, what is the type associated by Python to my variable age or to my variable salary, etc. All right, now that we've taken a quick look at what variables are, I want you to write a piece of code for me. I want you to write a program to swap the values of 2 variables. Take a look. Here is an example. I have 2 variables to begin with. Let's just say this line here, this row here is our input state. I will give you 2 variables. I will give you a variable called my variable. I will give you a variable called your variable. Name does not matter. You can change the names. As long as you have 2 variables, it's fine. And let's say the first value stored is 44 and the second value in the second variable stored is 22. I just want you to write a piece of code, 1 instructions, 2 instructions, 3 instructions, how many you want, to swap the values so that the first variable has the value of the second variable that was stored inside the second variable, and the second variable has the value that was stored inside the first variable. So given 2 variables, names do not matter, initial values do not matter. After your code is executed, the values should be swapped. So that is all for this video. I hope you take some time, 5, 10, 15 minutes, even half an hour. Think about this problem. How will you solve it? And I will see you in the next video with a solution. Happy coding. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share this video with your friends if you find it useful.